Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of I Never Knew, but My Dog Did podcast. As always, I have a fabulous guest with me today. I am Maureen Scanlon, your hostess, and most of you know me as Life Coach Maureen. I'm so excited because my next guest, we were going to do a podcast. We connected and I don't know what happened. We did not get it scheduled. So when he reached out again, I was like, oh, there you are. So you know it's meant to be when everything comes back around. And that's probably a life coaching moment right there that I could go off sidebar. But today, everyone, I'm so excited to bring you David Greer. He is an entrepreneurial coach, author, and facilitator. He is the catalyst who gets you to fully live your dreams now. If you spend 1 hour reading his book, Wind in Your Sails, attend a 1 hour talk with him, or get a 1 hour of one-to-one coaching, you'll have 3 concrete action items that will shift and accelerate your business within 90 days. Outside of all of that wonderful stuff, David has a story, as you know, on I Never Knew. We always have to have a story, and it helps us as listeners hear people's stories to give us hope and to say, hey, everyone has been there and done that. How did you get through your struggle? So with David, he had years of using alcohol, and he's now 14 years sober. He leads an extraordinary sober life in 12-step recovery, and he also coaches other entrepreneurs challenged with alcoholism and addiction. So without further ado, hello, my friend David. How are you?
Hello, Maureen. I am doing fantastic, and I'm so excited to be here and really looking forward to us spending time together today.
Yes, listeners, before we started recording, I mean, we could have talked for an hour and we had to go, hold on, wait a minute, we got to start recording because it's such an authentic conversation with David, and he's so genuine. And I know that you guys are going to hear it the way that I feel it. So, David, what we do is we start with our knee story. So, here at I Never Knew, it's that moment that really you were brought to your knees. And a lot of us have mini knee stories, but I know for me, there was just that sort of catalyst of being tired of living the life I was living and realizing something had to change and I had to figure out what had to change. Tell us about your knee story.
I'm an alcoholic in recovery, and here in Vancouver, when we have a birthday, like we have another year of sobriety, we celebrate by having a cake with your home group, the group that you show up with regularly. And we are asked to share what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And so if you give me permission to do that, I think it will help put the context. Because if I got to tell a little bit about what it was like to really understand how I came to my knees.
Yeah.
And I actually start the story at the beginning, which is I was born in the Royal Alec Hospital at Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and I was immediately relinquished for adoption. So I was the result of a teenage pregnancy. I have learned in the last few years. And I was adopted as the first child into an upper middle class family in Edmonton. 3 years later, they adopted my sister Jane. And 3 years after that, my mom got pregnant. I had a birth child, my brother John. And my father took over the business that my grandfather had started in 1923, and which my brother now runs, celebrating 100 years in business this year, which is an amazing milestone.
Yeah.
And I don't think either of my, family of origin parents, who are my mom and dad, like that is mom and dad. Yeah. I don't think either of them were alcoholics, but they were pretty much daily drinkers. Dad comes home from the office, pours mom a gin and tonic, pours himself a scotch, and they have that while they're visiting for the day or when we're starting dinner. So that was normalized for me, like daily drinking. That it was okay. And when they had parties, they were pretty good binge drinkers. So put away a lot of booze. So again, not alcoholic, but did get that modeling. In high school, I was an academic. geek jock. So I was sportsman of the year in my grade 12 year. But in grade 10, I'm like going to football keg parties and drinking, and after basketball games, going out, with team members or people that showed up and drinking. So, and some of that would be a lot of drinking, would be binge drinking. And again, by then, I still don't think I was an alcoholic then, because during the week, I didn't have anything to drink. I mostly led an alcohol-free life. When I was 18, I moved to Vancouver, and eventually went back to university, asked my spouse out for our first date after a chemistry lab in first year. And on Monday, we will celebrate our 41st anniversary. So that's been an amazing experience. And, played for the rugby team, another great group to be able to drink with. And then while I was in fourth year at UBC, so my degree is in computer science. I said I was an academic geek. And I knew since grade 8 or 9, I wanted to take computers and business and put them together. And that's what I did. And fourth year, I'm 22 years old. I joined a young software startup as the first employee after the founders.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I didn't really know how extraordinary it was or what it meant to join a startup. I mean, a lot of my life has kind of been like that. I just kind of fall into the next thing, and I don't have any context to tell me how weird or strange or unusual it is.
I love that. Going with the flow. And, you and I are somewhat similar in age, and that wasn't a big thing back then. For us, it was join a company, stay at it for 30, 40 years, get that 401k. Well, they didn't even have that. They had pensions,
Right.
and you get that insurance and just stay at it. So to do that, that's such a risk-taking thing for you at that age, and startups were not a thing, and computers were just sort of starting out as well.
Barely. Like, I was very lucky in Edmonton that I went to one of the very few high schools that had a data processing program. Wow. And had courses and a teacher, and that's where I actually started programming computers, was like in grade 11.
Wow, amazing.
At a time in like 1974, the time they're not right. Personal computer hasn't been invented yet.
Right. Oh, wow. You're a trailblazer. So you kind of lived your life just sort of going with the flow, and whatever came up, you just kind of went for it.
Yes. And often being the trailblazer. Again, I didn't realize how much, I'm an early adopter. I do things, I was like the 600,000th person on LinkedIn.
What? My gosh.
In the early 90s, it was like for the company that I joined and was with for 20 years, was like the 80,000th registered website in the world. So, like these kind of things have just been part of my experience. And, part of my experience is, how I coped with my feelings and how I dealt with stress or success was with alcohol.
Yeah.
And, I don't know exactly when I became a pickle. Like we say in recovery, there's a point where, once a pickle's a pickle, it can't go back to being a cucumber. And, for me, the disease of alcoholism is one of really the progressive nature of the disease. And so sometime between my early 20s and about 32, when Carolee got pregnant with our first child, I became an alcoholic. And how I know is that when I reflect back, when Carolee got pregnant with our oldest, Jocelyn, I committed to her to stop. I mean, she committed to stop drinking while she was pregnant, and I committed to supporting her. And that lasted 24 hours.
Oh.
And I don't actually know how I squared it with Carolee, but I did. And I'm pretty certain by then I was pretty much a daily drinker.
Okay.
And again, the progressive nature of the disease is, probably 6 drinks when Jocelyn was born was enough, and then at the end it was 12 or 15 or 18, which is, there's actually your brain actually it likes to be in stasis, and so it actually generates chemicals to counteract the alcohol, and then it gets better at doing that over time. So that's why most alcoholics need more alcohol to get the same effect over time. It's just actually our brain being super good at protecting us.
Yeah, or trying to at least, right?
Or trying to, yes.
I love that you said that, and I just want to throw this in when you were talking earlier, because we were talking offline, and you had said, "Hey, do you have alcoholism in your background in your family?" And it's funny because I was like, "Well, no, we didn't consider it that." And then as I hear you speaking, you said, "Well, Dad had a drink every day, and then Mom had a drink every day, but they weren't alcoholics." And I remember when I was in my marriage to an alcoholic, he told me he was an alcoholic, and I said, "No, you're not." Because I didn't see him drinking, and I didn't see him that changed, I guess. I thought it was not that big of a deal. I mean, when he would drink, his personality would change. So what is considered an alcoholic? And I've been through Al-Anon myself, and I know that it's when it begins to control you. What would you say is considered an alcoholic?
So alcoholism is a medically diagnosed disease. It's called alcohol use disorder.
Mhm.
So there are metrics for AUS. Like, for example, if you drink more than, for a guy, it's like 4 drinks at a time, or maybe it's 5 drinks at a time. For women, it'd be 4 drinks at a time. And you do that more than 1 month a year. Like if you did that consistently once a month, you would be considered exceedingly high risk for AUS.
Wow. Four to five drinks per month would be
Well, but
considered the
like
standard.
drunk as a binge. So
Okay.
like where you drunk them in a row without, water in between,
Wow.
and part of why I coach, entrepreneurs is like to close business deals, like a big high-end business deal. Like, the CEO, the entrepreneur is expected to fly down, have dinner with the clients, and, like I've had entrepreneurs say, is it normal to like have 2, 3 drinks before dinner and then have a bottle of wine each? And I said, it might be normal, but everyone there is demonstrating alcoholic drinking. I can't tell you that they're alcoholics because I can't diagnose anyone. Right. But I can sure say, like, that would be a high indicator.
Wow, that's great. I've interviewed a lot of people who are in recovery from alcoholism and substance abuse, and I have always wanted to ask that question because there really isn't a standard, and so that's interesting that you said that. I love that you kind of clarified that for us.
And I have both the Health Canada and the the NIAAA organization, which is basically the organization in the United States, who is like the expert on alcoholism and addiction. They have slightly different, very similar standards,
Okay.
like what the warning signs are. And I have a YouTube video on that, and I have it on my website. So if anyone, has someone in their life and they're curious about it, or they're curious about it for themselves, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to share that. I don't have more of the specifics at the top of my mind
Perfect.
right
Perfect.
in this moment.
We'll have all
Hold this
that.
thought for a moment. I want to go forward a little bit in my story because
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to some of the things that you experienced. So we move forward. We have our second child. It's the same thing. I don't stop drinking. Carolee does. I don't. Eventually, and then shortly after that, I ended up buying out one of the founders of Robel was the name of the company I joined when I was 22. It was named for Robert and Annabelle, the 2 founders. So that's where Robel, and I bought out Annabelle, which was massively stressful. I was standing on the 17th floor of an office tower in Vancouver outside the elevators of a really high-end accounting firm, with tears in my eyes at the stress of taking on debt and what I was going to do, but I did go through with it. I'm sure I drank lots to cope. I don't remember specifically doing that, but I can just trust that I did.
Yeah.
And then now I was like a big shot because now I'm like co-owner of the family. I don't even have employee reviews anymore. Like I'm making a ton of money. And so being a big shot is part of my story and my alcoholism. And then Carolee got pregnant with her third, and life moved on. And then in late 2000, the other founder of Robel, the Robert, he and I had a huge disagreement about how the strategic direction for the company. He wanted to downsize it, kind of milk it till the last customer leave and turn out the light. I'm like, because we could see the end of our market was coming. Didn't know exactly when, but change was coming. And I'm like, we built these extraordinary people who do extraordinary thing. I would like to find new areas, take a little more risk, a little more money, and move in new directions. And I think both plans were viable. They weren't complementary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he ended up buying me out in early 2001. So I'm on the street, busy chasing deals, not noticing the dot-com meltdown, that this is not a good time to be starting anything in tech. And someone smarter than me sat me down, took me out to lunch, sat me down in her office and said, "Do you need to work right away?" And I'm like, well, no, I got a pretty good size check in my jeans, and I'm not done for life, but I don't need to work right away. And she told me how she had, in a career transition, gone to Australia, bought a VW van, and spent a year touring Australia. And I literally had the light bulb moment. If you think of the cartoon and the light bulb going off over my head, it happened sitting in that chair. And from that, Carolee and I hatched a plan where we decided to commission a sailboat in the south of France. And we took our 3 children and we homeschooled them for 2 years while sailing more than 5,000 miles in the Mediterranean.
Oh my goodness, how amazing.
An extraordinary experience and a legacy that we still have as a family. So the Disney version of this would go, kumbaya, David saw the light, he got sober on this big trip, connected to nature. The truth is the Mediterranean is a fantastic place for an alcoholic. Every port we pull into, there's, shoreside restaurants, bars, right? Wine is 1/10 the price it costs in Canada. Even beer is about half the price. So drank my way through the Mediterranean with one exception. So we did over 20 overnight passages in the Mediterranean, where you're going for like more than 24 hours continuously. And you're on watch in the middle of the night. And I never drank on one of those passages.
Wow, that's awesome. That's
So
wonderful.
When like the life of my family was totally at stake, and I don't even know if I really thought, I did think about it a little bit because I know I journaled about it a bit, but like it just happened. I didn't have to like consciously put it down. And one of those early passages, my son Kevin, so Kevin was 10 at the time, and he stood watch with me, and our daughter Jocelyn, who was 12 at the time, stood watch with Carolee. And we came on watch in the Western Mediterranean Sea, and it was a big high pressure. It was calm, so we were actually motoring. And we came on watch at 2 a.m, and the Milky Way was absolutely like horizon to horizon. In fact, Kevin and I kept mistaking stars and horizon for like the lights of a ship.
Oh, wow.
That bright. And I think that was the universe reaching out to me. And I think that those experiences overnight, where I didn't drink, were the universe reaching out to me.
Wow.
So we come back from that trip, and I don't get sober. Like came back in 2003, and I didn't get sober till 2009. So what happened in between was I came back, I really had trouble finding fulfilling work. Like I had all this experience. I started so young. I learned so much by the seat of my pants that like I just knew a lot of stuff that most entrepreneurs, even here in Vancouver, didn't really know. Yeah. And I was coming across like that too, rather than more helpful. So at an event, I went to a training event so I did a bunch of angel investing, director work, being on boards of directors, coaching and mentoring young CEOs. And I took one of my CEOs I was mentoring to an event by a guy, Vern Harnish, who has a framework and a couple books. And in the back of the room were two coaches. And at the break in the morning, I went back and talked to both of those coaches. And one of those coaches had me on the edge of tears in about 3 or 4 minutes conversation. And he gave me his card, and his card sat next to my phone. And every time I looked at that card, I thought I really should call this guy. And the phone then would look like it weighed about 10,000 pounds.
Yeah. What did he say that had you almost in tears? Dude, was it just
He
straight to the point?
He took his hand and he kind of waved it around the room, and he said, I bet 90% of the people in this room could use your help.
Wow.
And none of them were accepting it. Like I couldn't find anyone to help and not be paid.
Mm-hmm.
And that comment was what brought a tear to the corner of my eye.
Because what did you realize at that moment? That you weren't living up to your potential, and
I was completely unfulfilled, that the work that I was doing was completely unfulfilling. Like it just kind of landed.
Wow. And I'm gonna jump in for 1 second, because I wrote something down, and I wrote, it doesn't matter how successful we are. If we're not fulfilled and we're not feeling our purpose, then it doesn't matter. And listeners, I know you're listening and you're like, wow, he had this successful business. He got these opportunities at 22. He had a wonderful wife and 3 beautiful children. He got to sail for a year. Yeah. Okay. You had a problem with alcohol. You could see how people would be like,
Totally.
I'm living on the street, guy. I lost my job at, McDonald's, and, I got nothing. My family disowned me. And that's when I became an alcoholic. But what I want to point out is no one's problems are bigger and no one's problems are smaller. It's what's internally, how we're feeling about ourselves, our lives, and our purposes. I think that why we have addictions, and everyone's story is different and they're all the same. So I just wanted to say that.
I've probably been to over 1,800 12-step meetings, and everyone's story, as you said, is different, like unique in their own way. And yet the feelings, that emptiness, that hollowness, that desperation, I've heard that over and over and over again. And that's the feeling that we share.
The commonality.
So 3 weeks later, Coach Kevin called me and he said, hey, I thought there was a spark that morning. Or he said, do you remember me? And I, in my mind, I'm going, fuck, pardon me. Yes, I really remember you.
We drop F-bombs here. You just, whatever flows here. Go ahead.
But I just said, yes, I do remember our conversation. And I ended up hiring him. And actually, our first coaching session was on my 50th birthday.
Wow.
August 9th, 2007. I remember, because at that time, to become a client of Kevin's, you had to agree to 2 8-hour coaching days.
Wow. So, I love those.
Like super intense. And for 18 months, we worked together. Well, we worked together for 9 years. But initially, we worked together for 18 months, and we kind of cleared off all the clutter on the table, cleaned up a whole bunch of things in all aspects of my life, until the elephant in the room was all that was left. And on January 26, 2009, I sent an email to Kevin, because we had a coaching session the next day. And the way I worked with Kevin was I always sent us like my wins and the topic for the day. And I had my last beer about 10:30 at night. And then I wrote the email message and I said, the topic is my drinking. And the next day was a Tuesday, and we had a coaching session in the morning. This is 14 and some odd years later, and it's still pretty fresh in my memory.
Yeah.
And I told Kevin I had a drinking problem, and he asked me stuff about it. And he coached me to go to 12-step recovery. And I committed to him. That was a Tuesday. I committed to go by Friday to my first meeting. And being the overachiever that I am, that afternoon knew I was going to a networking event like between 4 and 8 or 5 and 8. So I looked up meetings, and lo and behold, on the drive home, like this is how the universe works. On the drive home, a quarter of a block off the main street I'm going to be driving down, there was a meeting at 8:30. So I finished my event a little early. So I show up at this meeting about 10 past 8, and it was a big meeting. I stood in the back. It took me years to really admit how scared I was. And a couple of young ladies came out and really welcomed me. I still remember those. I don't remember their words. I just remember the feeling, feeling welcomed and feeling like, they wanted me here. And the meeting started, and I kind of sat in the aisle seat, ready to bolt. And and at that time in that meeting, they asked if there's any newcomers, and so the chairperson asked the question kind of 2/3 the way through the meeting, and I sat on my hands, and when I sat on my hands, unfortunately, the chairperson waited about 30 seconds. And kind of at the last possible second, I stood up and said, "I'm David, I'm an alcoholic." And I think that's the watershed moment, because it's the first time of admittance.
Yeah.
And I started going to meetings, and I liked that meeting, and I made it my home group. It's still my home group today. So every Tuesday night at 8:30, if you're in Vancouver, come check it out. It's a Solano group.
Is there's such a relief for you when you go to that first meeting, and then and I think it's, for anyone who is going through anything, to meet others. That's why I do this podcast, to meet others who've been there, done that. It's like suddenly you're not alone. Was that sort of, tell us your feeling of being in that meeting?
I don't know if it came from that first meeting, but I kept going to meetings.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, for if you're new to recovery, like keep going to meetings, like let the magic happen, because it won't happen right away. And yeah, I was really uncomfortable. I mean, fortunately, I'm a very social person. I'm mostly an extrovert. Over the years of recovery, I've learned how much an introvert I am and how much I need to kind of be alone to restore myself. But it is kind of my natural inclination. So going to meetings and being social and being with people was not particularly hard.
Yeah. So you have to push yourself. If the first meeting doesn't feel like everything you wanted it to, just keep going back or find another group. Is that really key in recovery?
That's key. I mean, one of the things we suggest is if you're just coming to recovery, try 90 in 90 meetings in 90 days.
Yeah.
Which sounds like a lot, but if you look at the time you put into your drinking.
True.
We're only talking an hour a day, and I can guarantee you, for most alcoholics, you were putting more than an hour a day into your drinking, or into getting rid of the empties, or into acquiring more.
Yeah.
Right. And so something you shared was about, kind of being in denial about alcoholism in your family of origin. So I told my wife that I was going to go to AA and I was an alcoholic, and she was totally distraught. And she didn't believe me. In fact, to this day, we've come to an agreement where she agrees that I believe that I'm an alcoholic.
Really? So she's not convinced. She's not convinced of it from her perspective. She didn't see it as a problem.
I'm not a truck driver. I'm not a logger. I don't go to bars. I don't get in fights. I'm not on the wrong side of the tracks drinking out of a brown paper bag. Like, a high performing alcoholic is okay in her world.
Fascinating.
And then you're not an alcoholic.
And that had to come from something, right? Did that come from her family of origin?
I mean, she comes from alcoholics, and that's the way the family behaved. And she also made a personal promise to herself that she would never marry an alcoholic.
Oh, so it's almost like maybe a defiance of, I'm not going to believe you're an alcoholic.
Well, it's a really hard place to be. Like, you made a super important commitment to yourself, and then suddenly your husband shows up and says, "Surprise."
I remember that. I remember that moment of my husband coming and saying, I'm an alcoholic. And this is when I was coming to him to say, I'm going to divorce you. And also finding out I was pregnant with my third child. So there was a lot going on at that moment. And so I'm going through AA with him and Al-Anon, pregnant with my third child. So on top of emotions and hormones from that. But I do remember that, and I can completely empathize with your wife. It's like, I didn't want to believe it, but I knew it. I knew it in the back of my mind. And I remember the moments of saying, if I can't beat them, join them. So thinking I could moderate it. So, okay, instead of telling you you can't drink, and this is such a codependent thing, I'll tell you, instead of telling you you can't drink, I'll just say, well, you can have 2 drinks. It didn't matter though. And this is something I want to talk about too, is the fact that it's not always how much you drink, because I had been with people who drank 1 beer and you would have thought they drank a case or a keg. Like their personality changed so much. And we talked offline before this. My grandfather was that way. My grandfather did not drink a lot, but when he drank, he just became irate and this different person. But he could do that after only 2 or 3 beers. So it's how they metabolize is what I understand. Is that correct?
Yes, it's how it's metabolized. It's how it operates in your brain.
Okay.
And yeah, it's like, having a personality change after 2 drinks would indicate that you have issues with alcohol.
Yeah. So
Right.
back to that, how do we know we're an alcoholic? Well, when you're out of control, or that the next day when people are like, you were a total jerk yesterday, sometimes it's not the
Or
amount.
and other things like, do you think about alcohol all the time? Do you think about
Mm.
when you're going to have your next drink? Because it's
Oh.
like normies, which is what we in recovery call you that aren't alcoholics.
Normies, I love it.
Normies, normal people who don't have an issue with alcohol don't think about it all the time. They're not always thinking about their next drink, right?
Yeah.
So if it consumes a lot of your internal dialogue in your brain, that's an indicator. For us alcoholics, like moderating, like for me, my wife like will drink a half a glass of wine and go, oh, I'm kind of feeling enough, and just leave it.
Yeah.
Like, you want to drive an alcoholic crazy, do that. like like
Watch
I
me
mean,
moderate.
well, it's so inconceivable. And of course, when I was drinking, I would just say, oh, you're not going to finish that? Well, how about I do? And she just hand me the glass, and of course I'd finish it. And if I only have 2 drinks, then I'm like just totally obsessed about, thinking about whether I'm going to have a third, or, how I'm going to get through the rest of the night with only having 2 drinks. Like, it's actually easier to have no drinks than to actually have 2 and stop.
Wow. Ooh,
Like,
I love that insight. I
it's
love that
just
insight.
painful.
Wow, that's fascinating. And we can attribute that to anything with people who smoke cigarettes or people who eat, who overeat. When you become sort of this, it's that thing that you have to think about all the time, and it controls how you're gonna, schedule your day, schedule your night. It really becomes this part of, this is the one thing that tells me how to live my life. And that's when that you're just completely out of control because it's controlling you. And I think that's really where, even in regards to mental health, when you have, anything mental health, I think related, that is controlling you and it's something you're thinking about continuously, those are the times when you really need to reach out, get a coach. I love that you said that you got a coach and you still see a coach. I had a life coach before I was life coaching. I can't emphasize enough. For me, I think therapy is great as well, but I think coaching is, I feel, at least my own coaching, and I'm certain yours is too, is the move forward that you need. I think the therapy can open you up to the self-actualization, but I think the coaching, we're I'll say this, I'm obsessed with your success. Okay, you don't have to be so obsessed with it, I'm going to be obsessed with it. I'm so obsessed with the moving forward for you that I don't allow you to go backwards. I don't allow you to, go back to the excuses, go back to the traumas, go back to that. We'll talk about it, but I still need you moving forward. And I think that's the difference with coaching. What do you think?
So here's how I'm just probably going to paraphrase what you said, but so people ask me, what's the difference between coaching and therapy? So in coaching, I help a client paint a future vision that is so compelling that they will draw themselves towards it. And then I will help remind them that that's where they're going when they stumble and fall, or their belief system starts letting them down. And they can power through an amazing amount of trauma and things, which isn't necessarily always the healthiest thing for us to power through that. And then as a coach, I work with people's belief systems. Like what, so you said you painted this really compelling story. I believe it. I believe in you, and you're not going there.
Yeah.
So then we have to dig around in belief systems, and then some of those are so deep.
Yep.
And that then I think we move to therapy, which I'm not trained for and not competent on, but a professional therapist is. And that usually takes longer, but releases you from these things that are deeply, deeply held experiences or beliefs that are part of you.
Yeah, because you could keep going back to those, like you said, if you're
right.
It's almost like you're going to be counterproductive to.
Well, and at some point I can't help you get to your goals because that belief system just you keep defaulting back into it.
Yeah.
And until you do some work around that, it'll be almost impossible to move forward. And I mean, I've done 12-step work, I've done personal therapy work. So Carolee and I on Monday will be married 41 years, I think I mentioned. And the first 30 years, we never had any professional help in our relationship. And then, after I went into recovery, we spent like 8 years in relationship counseling with 4 different sets of counselors because each one was appropriate at the time. And one of the discoveries was we were massively codependent. And we both come from really codependent families. So it's not surprising. And that has been one of my big growth edges, is to work through that.
Yes.
And I see that as my second biggest ism. So alcoholism is first, but then I think the codependency piece. And then it shows up, in all sorts of ways, people pleasing, something we call in my 12-step program false pride. So I either think I'm like way better than you, or surprisingly, I've discovered how many times I think I'm way worse than you. Because that's why I want to please you. So I'm going to do extra to please you so you'll like me.
Yeah.
Right. Rather than just saying, I'm just okay where I'm at and I'm just me being me and you're you being you. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Like
the acceptance piece that we all kind of tend to struggle with. And a lot of people have said that I've talked to is addiction is the symptom, and
correct.
the codependence and the trauma, yes, or the CPTSD is really the cause. And so I think that's something to remember too, that we have addictions because we're trying to self-soothe something, we're trying to, yes, escape something, not feeling whatever it is, it's the numbness. Or even there are people who are introverts and need to be extroverted, and that drinking helps them to be something that
exactly,
they're not, right?
Exactly.
So
the other way I've heard it described is that the ism, think of it as like an iceberg, and the part above the surface is the ism part, which is usually only 10% of the iceberg, and the 90% underwater, like that's the stuff you need to deal with. And once I took alcohol out of my life, my favorite way of dealing with uncomfortable things was taken away. So I had to go find other ways, which I've done over an extensive period of time. And 12-step recovery is not, as I practice it, is to me not about not drinking. It's about life. It's how do I cope with life on life's terms when I don't have my drug of choice, alcohol, to cope.
Yeah.
Right.
How do I find the joy that addiction was bringing me, technically?
Yeah. Or how do I, like I've had some very challenging, I want to move to some really recent events and just another little part of my story.
Sure.
And I haven't had to drink over it, which has been quite amazing. So 60 years of life and 9 years of recovery, I decided to go look into my birth families.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing that held me back was my codependency with my mother and what she might think of that. And I had to get past that. Like, she is an adult, she can have whatever reaction she has to my going and looking into the birth families. And that's her stuff, and this is mine. And 5 years ago, February, I reached out to the first of my birth family members, who was my birth mom, and had a conversation on the phone, which was very short. So my birth mother first was in just complete denial. I have no idea what you're talking about. So then I shared some more about, like, Alberta Adoption Services and my records. So then it's blame. Those people at Alberta Adoption Records, they never should have shared anything with you about the topic that 2 minutes before she just told me she knew nothing about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then just complete rejection. I want nothing to do with you.
Oh my gosh. Oh, and you were sober at this time.
I'd be 9 years sober.
Wow. So how did you deal with that? That's a pretty big traumatic thing, being rejected technically at birth and then being rejected sort of later on.
Yeah, and so there were a lot of gifts in it, but I'll answer your question about coping. So I went for about a 2.5 hour walk. I called my coach, who wasn't available, but I left a message. I called my sponsor, and I had a long conversation with him.
Right.
And one of his children were adopted, so he knew the parental side. And it was a sunny February day, so it was beautiful, and I just stayed close to nature. And Carolee called me an hour and a half, 2 hours in, and how are you doing? She asked, and she said, do you want me to meet you at the Sylvia Hotel down on English Bay Beach? And by then I was ready to accept that, actually, and which probably an hour before I wasn't. And by the end of the day, I was actually okay. Like, and it's a gift, because I could never experience that rejection that I experienced as a baby. Like, I mean, obviously there's some physical aspect of that's part of me. Like, I know almost for certain that my birth mother never held me, because birth moms at that time, it just wasn't allowed. By young women who were giving up their babies, relinquishing their baby for adoption. But I got to experience it as an adult. And of course, people coached me and reminded me that my birth mother was not rejecting me, since she didn't know who the hell I was.
True.
She was rejecting the experience of having me. And it turned out multi-decades of shame from my grandmother, Pearl, who never let her forget her big mistake.
Oh, so inserted in her continuously the shame, and you reaching out to her just brought it back, just whoosh, full force to her. And isn't that just really the way that it is in life? Is it's always about them. It's not. We always take everything so personal. Oh, it's about me. No, 99% of anything that happens between you and someone else is what's going on with them. And I think as we wrap up here, we got a few more minutes. I think something you just said, I think, is so beautiful. You gave us a real life, step by step. How do I handle those horrible, scary, traumatic, emotional things that happen while I'm in recovery that normally would have led me to my drinking? And I wrote it down, and I think it's beautiful. You reached out after this really sort of gut-wrenching knife in the heart thing. You reached out. You not only reached out to one person, your coach, they didn't answer, so you didn't go get a drink after that. You reached out to your sponsor. You talked to your sponsor for half an hour. You reached out. Your wife was there. You were seeking support of those that love you. And that's real life, because a lot of people could hear, oh yeah, the 12 step, you go once a week and blah, blah, blah. What about the other times when stuff happens, when shit happens to me on a daily basis? And you just gave us a real life walking step by step. This is how you do it. Just take it a moment at a time. Take a walk, be out in nature, reach out, get support. I love
and you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah.
That's what I've learned. Right. And you can't. So I want to try in 2 minutes because there's a little wrap up piece to this that's
Yeah,
very current and very emotional for me.
perfect.
So I told my birth mother I'd be reaching out to other Ridley family members. That's her maiden name and my birth name. Um, and I did. And I'm actually good friends with my aunt and uncle, her siblings, and with my two maternal sisters. So we're half sisters. And my older half sister called me 2 weeks ago Saturday to say that my birth mom Terry had been admitted to the hospital, and she was an inoperable and untreatable brain cancer, and that she only
Sorry.
had days or weeks to live. And so that was a Saturday. The Monday afternoon, I just had a feeling, and I just flew to Calgary and got an Airbnb. And 2 weeks ago Tuesday, the entire Ridley family was in the hospital room, and they invited me to be there. And my birth mother was still alive, but not conscious. And I was in her presence for 2 hours for the first time since I had been born.
Oh my gosh, that is, whew, that's heavy.
And
That was a heavy moment for you. So
it was, and 2 hours later, she passed away peacefully. And I was there with my aunt and uncle and my sisters and extended family members, and there were a lot of hugs and a lot of tears. And I felt very accepted. I felt very part of. And afterwards, my uncle Jim said, "Do you want a picture with you and Terry?" And there was a part of me that totally said, "No effing way." And there's a part of me said, "You'll never have a picture with her if you don't do it right now."
yeah,
So
don't regret it later because of how you feel right now.
so
Wow.
I took that. Jim took that picture, and afterwards I leaned over and I kissed her on the cheek and I said, "Take care,"
Oh,
which was also like wasn't what I wanted to do, and I knew it was the next right thing to do, and that I would regret it if I didn't do it.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I just held to, the light streaming through the window, to the group that was in the room, to the support that was there, and just leaned into all of that. And the next day, my uncle and siblings were cleaning out her apartment. And I already knew this about her, but full bottle of Canadian Club rye whiskey in the kitchen cupboard and a full case of 12 in the closet.
Mm,
So I had been told repeatedly that she was an alcoholic. I also have a brother, a stepbrother, or a half brother, Gary, who I never met because he died in 2015 of cirrhosis of the liver as a direct result of his alcoholism. So
yeah.
my family of origin, I had modeled kind of daily drinking, but my mother was being an alcoholic her entire life. And I wondered if she still was at the end. And the answer is absolutely. So
Yeah. We'll never get it. There's no definitive with nature versus nurture because you,
no,
you,
the
you can see right there, there's a 50-50 right there where, you had a little of both. And I think that's important to know about ourselves and in moving forward, living that life of choice. And what a beautiful ending though. It feels like there was so much healing and also this benefit of these additional connections and love from these family members that you never would have met, and now you have now this extended family of love and support and caring, and that's all we can ask for in this life is just to be
we
able to
haven't.
have
None of
that.
these people have known me for more than 5 years. And for almost all of them, except for my Aunt Marvy, I was a total surprise.
I love
Like
it.
they had no idea
That's
that there'd been a
that's
baby.
crazy that you don't know someone exists and all of a sudden there's someone out there that's a part of you, a piece of you. And I love that they embraced you. So as we wrap up, let's tell everyone where they can find you, your website, your book, everything where you can find my friend David, guys. So take it away, David.
Easiest is my website, coachdjgreer.com. So that's coach, D as in David, J as in James, Greer.com. And my phone number and my email address is on every page. There's a link to my book. I wrote a blog post this morning, so there's some current content on there. Of course, I don't know when this podcast will air, but
we're pretty
just
backed up, but that's okay. We're gonna get you
but
out there.
anyways, the blog post will still be there when you get around to going and checking it out.
Yes, it will. And Wind in Your Sails, is that available? Where's that available?
It's available anywhere that Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can get it in Kobo format. You can get it in Kindle format. It's available as an audiobook on Audible.
Perfect.
So wherever online you like to get books, you should be able to get a copy of my book, which is a book.
There.
So yeah, it each chapter starts with a sailing analogy, but it's actually a business book. The full title is Wind in Your Sails: Vital Strategies That Will Accelerate Your Entrepreneurial Success.
Love it. Love it, love it, love it. Reach out to him for coaching, my entrepreneurial friends. You're amazing. I love your story. I love your spirit. And I just am so glad you were with us today. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed him as much as I did, because he's very genuine and very authentic, and he gives us such an inspiring story. So if he can do it, you can do it. And again, you can reach out to him at coachdjgreer.com. And I'm certain he'll help you if you are on the road to recovery or in recovery or need recovery. So we're here to help one another. I'm going to wrap us up for today. As you know, you can find me at lifecoachmaureen.com. And of course, my books are available on Amazon as well. And don't forget our doggy boutique at mydogiseverything.net. I just came out with a brand new doggy treat, healthy PB&J. Yes, the doggies love the PB&J. And it's a organic preserve and xylitol-free peanut butter in those treats. So they're all healthy, no dyes, no preservatives for your pups. And I got a bunch of new products. So don't forget to go check that out for your furry babies. Love you all for listening. Don't forget to go and do those reviews, and any comments, questions, or if you want to be a guest, feel free to reach out to me. And that is all until next week. Love you all for listening. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Most of all, take care of those furry babies, and we'll see you later.